Did you know that just to change the oil on a Goldwing costs you close to $100 or more at a dealer? You can do a lot of these simple tasks yourself. Hey everyone, Cruiseman here. And today we're going to install a rear spoiler on the Goldwing, the 2012 Goldwing. This is a pretty intense operation because you're actually going to be drilling some holes into the bodywork. So you need to make sure you have the right tools. You need to make sure you take your time and do it right. Okay, to do this job, you don't really need a lot of tools, but you do need a few things. Number one, you're going to need a Phillips screwdriver. Pretty simple stuff. I'm actually going to use a power screwdriver, so if you have a Phillips tip for a cordless screwdriver, you can use that as well. You're going to need a 15/64 small drill bit. You're going to need a 7/16 drill bit, and you're going to need something like an ice pick or an awl, something to mark some spots in the plastic before you drill. Of course, you're going to need a drill. I'm using a cordless drill. You can use any kind of drill, and I also have a Phillips tip to use for the screwdriver instead of using the hand screwdriver. I always have a paper bowl or some kind of bowl handy. As I take screws out of the bike when I'm working on it, I keep everything in this bowl. That way I know where it is. That way they're not rolling around in the trunk. And also another tip, put your bike on the center stand before you get started. That way it's flat and level. It's much easier to work on than if it's leaning to one side. It's never probably the most important thing to do before you get started on this project is to make sure you completely read the instructions that come with the spoiler, because Honda does a pretty good job of going step by step of what you're going to do to install this spoiler on your bike. And it's very important. And on one page of the spoiler, on the back page, you've actually got a template. Now we're going to use a pair of scissors. We're going to cut this little template out, and we're going to use that to mark where we drill the holes in our trunk. And I'll show you. Okay, the first step is we're going to open up our trunk, and we're going to need to remove these lock stays up in the very top of the trunk here. These are what hold the trunk in place when you latch it. And then we're going to remove the inner cover of the trunk because we're going to need to get underneath there to drill our holes and to run our wires. Okay, next we're going to just unscrew all 13 of these little screws that hold this lid cover in place, and we're just going to go all the way around one at a time and take those screws out. Okay, now our lid little cover should just pop right off. Oh, I forgot a couple of screws. There's 2 more screws. There's actually 15 screws that hold this on. I forgot about the 2 little ones in the corners. Be careful before you try to pull this off. You might break a tab. Let's get those other 2 screws. Now, this will not come completely off until you unplug it. There's actually some electronics back here, and there's some things plugged in that you'll need to unplug. We'll do that next. Now, what I'm doing is I'm going to show you inside between the trunk lid and this little cover. You can see there's some wiring and a plug that's attached to the kind of the back side of this cover, if you can see in there. And what we're going to do, there's a little strap that's kind of holding those wires in place. We're just going to loosen that and pull it out a little bit, and we're going to unplug that plug unit. And once we unplug that, this lid liner will be free to come out, so we can get it out of the liner is off the inside of the trunk lid. You can see the plug that we undid here, and it was plugged into that liner, and you just push up. It's a little easier to show you now that it's off. On the bottom of that plug, there's a little gray detent that you mash on, and if you mash on that and pull out, it will come out of that receptacle, and that lets that liner come free. Okay, we're going to use this template that we cut out of the instructions, and you can see the 2 holes that have been cut out. Those holes are going to line up with these little rings. I don't know if you see these. These are kind of raised rings inside the trunk. And when those line up, then you use that as your point of reference to mark where you're going to drill your holes. Now, don't ask me why Honda saw fit to put these little markers on here, and they didn't go ahead and mark the spots where you drill the holes. Doesn't make any sense to me, but they didn't. So you use this little template, and then we'll get the awl or the ice pick, and we'll make tiny little dimples up here. And there actually might be on your bike, there might be some little tiny marks where you can feel, and those are the spots where you're going to drill those holes. So they may actually have some little stubs sticking out. They're real tiny though, you can hardly see them. And so that's where we're going to mark. Now on the left side, which is looking forward on the bike, we're looking to the left, we're actually going to mark these 3 holes, because one of the holes is used for the wiring to go to the spoiler. On the other side, we're going to turn this template over and do the reverse, but we're only going to mark 2 holes on the right side, which hold the spoiler on. Make sure you don't drill 3 holes on the left side and the right side. Okay, now I've got my small drill bit loaded. We're going to drill starter holes first, the smaller size. Then we'll come back with our larger size drill bit and kind of ream them out to the larger size, and that's what our bolts will actually go through. But start out with the small drill bit first. I gotta tell you, it is a little bit scary drilling into the trunk lid. No matter how many times you do it, it's scary. But you gotta do it. Man up. Okay, got the bigger bit in. Let's get it done. Looks pretty nasty when you look at it on top. Doesn't matter, it ain't gonna show. Okay, our holes are drilled. We better hope we got it right, because you only get one chance. You get it wrong, you gotta buy a new trunk lid, and they're not cheap. I don't mean to scare you or anything. I mean, it really isn't that difficult, but, you know, makes it more interesting to watch the video. When you drill that 7/16 hole with this big drill bit, it's going to kind of chew up this plastic. It's going to be really ugly, and you have a lot of this excess stuff hanging off. So you might have to get a little file, a little round file, and clean it up, because you'll have little chunks of plastic hanging off. Don't worry about it, but it's a good idea to clean it up with a little file. There is one other tool that I forgot to mention that you are going to need for this job, and that is a 5mm hex wrench. I don't know why I forgot to tell you about that, but the bolts that hold the spoiler on from underneath are actually hex bolts. So you will need a 5mm. It doesn't have to be a T-handle. Any hex wrench will do, but just make sure you have one. Your big holes drilled. Now you're ready to feed these wires through the center hole, and there's a grommet that you're going to have to get into that hole as well, just to kind of seal it. You'll see it. It's about halfway up that wire, and you'll just have to work that in to get it flush so that it seals off where those wires go. And the last step is just, let's bolt it down. Get your hex bolts and feed them through the holes. Well, it's really not the last step. You still have to hook up the wires, but it's the last step of getting the spoiler mounted. It's also important when you tighten these, don't over tighten. Remember, this is actually being held in place by plastic. If you over torque it or you over tighten it, you can actually break, this plastic. You could crack it. So just be careful that you don't go too tight. You'll know, when you feel it start really getting firm, that should be tight enough. Now you could use a torque wrench. I don't use a torque wrench for this, but Honda recommends that you do, obviously. But those are down, they're tight. Spoiler is mounted. Now we do the wiring. Okay, wiring up the spoiler is really pretty simple. You can't screw it up. You've got this one connector underneath the trunk, and here's the little harness adapter that came with your spoiler, and you basically just plug it in and make sure you've got it, there we go, it's in good and tight, connected, and then you simply connect the two leads here coming from the spoiler to this harness, and that's all there is to it. Make sure you've got a good tight connection all the way around on both leads. Okay, everything's wired up. Now in another video I'm going to have a tail blazer that I'm going to connect to this, and it will connect in between here. I'm going to do that in a separate video, and that lets the LEDs flash. So all that's really left to do now is plug the big plug here back into the cover that goes underneath, screw it all down, and hey, we should be ready to go. We'll test out our LED brake light and see if it works. Hey, look there, it works. What a miracle. Hey, you know what? I think the spoiler with the brake light is a huge safety feature. I think everybody with a Goldwing should have one. Not only, in my opinion, does it improve the looks of the rear end of the bike, I think it makes a dramatic difference in the appearance of the bike, but I think it's a big safety feature. The more light you have in back when people are coming up behind you, the better. And like I said, in another video, we're going to show you how to install the tail blazer so that when you touch your brakes, this thing will flash on and off. It'll also turn this into a running light so that it stays on all the time.